They said it wasn't possible. They said it couldn't be done. But after 28 books, 15 games, and a movie, it's finally happened. They finally made a post-Help Wanted FNaF game that I want to play. And that game did the one thing I have been begging Steel Wool to do since 2019. Was that? Into the Pit was made by a different studio? Mega Cat Studios. Into the Pit was the first story to kick off the Fazbear Fright series, and it hit the ground running. It does what I consider to be an essential for any good Five Nights at Freddy's story. Don't just waste time being overly concerned about explaining its own goofy premise. Use that initial goofiness to unnerve us. And when you read a summary for the short story's initial premise, goofy is certainly a word that comes to mind.
A time-traveling ball pit? How whimsical! How absurd! Scott will write anything at this point!
But I wasn't surprised for a second when I heard it was going to be turned into its own game. The spring Bonnie on the cover of the book was never for show. Here's a proper summary of the plot for you. During Oswald's summer vacation, he travels back in time to 1985, where he meets two kids named Chip and Mike. He spends all of his free time in an apparition of the past, one where he actually has friends, can play games with them, and have something to look forward to during the day. His parents work full-time and don't have the kind of money to pay for a babysitter, so Oswald is very, very lonely. Lonely enough that he can ignore how creepy it is that the animatronics here resemble drawings that he used to make. Lonely enough to ignore how weird it is that time doesn't pass at all whenever he's in the ball pit. And lonely enough to ignore how uncomfortable it is that a man in a yellow rabbit costume is acting strangely. That nobody else but him seems to notice that the rabbit even exists. On the last day of his summer break, Oswald comes back to 1985, only to be led by the yellow rabbit into a small room. One where a half-dozen kids in party hats are lined against the wall, dead and waiting for him. And even after he's able to escape, that's just the beginning of his worries. When Oswald's saved, Spring Bonnie returns the favor by dragging Oswald's dad right back into the ball pit. And when the rabbit emerges from it, Oswald slowly begins to realize that this thing didn't just attack his dad. It now is his dad. This might be a lot of fans' first meaningful experience with one of the books, and if you're one of them, you may be surprised with the reception Into the Pit is getting. I'm here to tell you that this was not a stroke of genius or even luck, but just the writing on the wall of how these games are going to be going. If the games are going to do well, in any case. Start making serious adaptations of the books. Let me explain. It's not impossible to make an adaptation of something that drastically changes from its source material. That's how you get your Forrest Gumps, your Shinings, your How to Train Your Dragons. While all of these are good movies, they're pretty poor adaptations. The best kind, in my opinion, is one that takes the original premise of that story and represents what already made it compelling, twisting it in a way that best serves that new medium. That's where you get your Heathers the Musicals, your Series of Unfortunate Events, and the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, holy shit. The kind of adaptation Into the Pit's developers have made becomes apparent very early on. Stepping into Freddy's during and after the incident is terrifying, with the game really upping just how disturbing the situation is with how drastic it changes the visuals. While a book can describe what it's like to be hearing frightened children screaming and sobbing in a place that's meant to be safe for them, it's another thing entirely to be put directly into that situation with cleverly placed sound. That's just one of the many ways the game lovingly improves on the story. It's there in the mundane horror of no one caring enough to clean up the dead possum on the road. It's there in how they had the guts to threaten the player with a spring lock failure for a child. And don't even get me started on all the life or lack thereof they added to our antagonist. In the novella, Spring Bonnie spends most of the story acting exactly like you'd expect a parent to. He drives Oswald home, takes him to school, makes him food, pours him some fruit punch, and it's a very quiet but active threat. Oswald, and by extension you, the reader, never know when he's going to make good on that threat of killing him. The game, however, cranks this active threat up. There are times that Spring Bonnie will let you go about your business, but you should never make the mistake of letting your guard down around him. The unpredictability of if he'll go to his room to writhe on the bed or chase you to the front door leaves every encounter with him deliberately tense, and one wrong move means it's all over for you. And I haven't even mentioned just how stunning this game looks. This is a fully pixelated FNaF game with dynamic lighting and physics. The first time I saw this game's visuals, it instantly reminded me of Project Box, an unfortunately cancelled fan game with the vision of adapting the Silver Eyes trilogy into a point-and-click horror game. For Mega Cat to have chosen a similar style of gameplay is pretty telling of the amount of respect they had for the original short story. The reason I bring all this up is not to say that I find Into the Pit perfect. Some of the ways to achieve the better endings can be pretty convoluted.
Did I mess up? Now we cool? You need to press the gumball machine 100 times. No joke. Well, since you highlighted the message, it must be true. Where's the gumball machine? What did I say? Can you see them? We're in.
And I think that the decision to have a permadeath mode is almost cruel when Spring Bonnie can spawn basically on top of you in certain rooms.
Meet Mom. Oh, goodness gracious. Oh, wait. Oh, it's permadeath on Nightmare. Oh, well, that's annoying.
There is no such thing as the perfect game. However, to forgive my harsh language here, Into the Pit is objectively a better game than Security Breach or Ruin in one specific aspect: story adaptation. And it is one of the things that has really been holding the Steel Wool titles back from being the great games that I know the studio is capable of. I have been saying for years that I wanted Steel Wool to make more concrete adaptations of the books, only for the monkey paw to curl come Ruin's release. One of the common criticisms I've seen levied against Steel Wool over the years is just how difficult it is to follow the storyline from Security Breach onwards. And while there has most certainly been executive meddling on Sony's part, it's never helped that Steel Wool has taken a half-in, half-out approach to using ideas and elements from the books that never really felt like they were going to lead anywhere. I was truly excited when I realized that the Mimic was going to play an important part in Ruin, only for that feeling to have diminished after I actually experienced said story. In the books, the Mimic is this truly terrifying entity that attacks first because it's the only thing it knows how to do. A creature with the mind of a child that was physically brutalized for doing its job. In the games, much of its character has been stripped away, and the connection feels far shallower as a result.
You're not Gregory. What are you?
This is emblematic of the problems plaguing the Steel Wool games. By having to make their games as appealing as possible to a wider gaming audience, it loses more and more of its identity along the way. You can't make a decision to adapt from the books, but try to make them palatable to cater to some sort of market appeal. The books are genuinely too weird and too controversial at times for that decision to go well for anyone. All it serves is to confuse a new audience who's unfamiliar to these story beats and characters because you haven't given them a reason to care, and alienate veteran FNaF gamers and book readers who would have been excited to see a character like the Mimic come to life.
And I know that the "but it wouldn't appeal" argument is moot because of the existence of the FNaF movie. Not only was it the highest grossing horror film for 2023, but it had the third highest grossing opening weekend for a horror movie of all time. It succeeded in spite of its sweeping critical panning, which is a reminder that sometimes critics can and are out of touch with audience perceptions. And yeah, some of the key points of that movie? Guess where they originate? Foxy stalking Abby into the arcade? Silver Eyes. Abby drawing pictures of the animatronics before meeting them, and this? Into the Pit, baby. That whole section where Golden Freddy is implied to have killed Michael and Abby's aunt and leads Abby to the pizzeria. That's a chilling recreation from one of my favorite moments in the Twisted Ones. And this doll is pretty much just Ella. Coincidence? Maybe, but this is the same movie that lovingly called back to Chica's Magic Rainbow, Midnight Motorist, Sans' Ness, Sparky the dog twice, and they even cared enough to name the guy that the cupcake murdered Carl. That's just the stuff I can remember off the top of my head. The books are an artistic goldmine, and as disarming as they can be, I am nothing if not sincere about how much staying power they can have. My excessively highlighted and annotated copy of The Fourth Closet says as much.
Before Into the Pit came out, I was seriously considering whether or not I could call myself a fan of these games anymore. I hadn't truly enjoyed a FNaF game since Help Wanted came out, and that was 5 years ago now. The State of Security Breach's story broke my heart. Ruin just didn't do it for me, and as pretty as Help Wanted 2 was, the storyline was not only difficult to keep up with, but just frustrating. This is coming from someone who's been a fan of this series since year one. Whatever it is you're doing here isn't working. I want to see these games succeed. But since Security Breach, mainline FNaF games haven't felt like FNaF anymore, and that just makes me really sad. If I want Steel Wool to learn anything from Into the Pit, it's that people can and do care about the FNaF books, and if that's the direction they want to take their games, they need to understand what made these stories and characters work. Have more faith in your story and the stories you're adapting from. There's a reason why they worked, and it definitely wasn't because they were trying to have a mass market appeal. Have a nice day, and...
Since we really don't have a security guard right now, you're pretty much the person in charge. I guess it might be a bit overwhelming at first, but as long as you're locking the doors, making sure no one is trying to stay overnight, you'll do fine.